How are you? How's everything? Your travels were good?
Um, yeah, all good. We had one of my grandsons come and stay for a few days. I hadn't seen him for quite some time, especially since we've been overseas, and it was just awesome. He's he's technically he's one of my step grandsons. He's 26. My wife, who passed away, was older than me, so he's her number three grandson. But he and I were always very, very close. And I started talking to him about this LOA stuff, law of attraction, and he's really interested. So that was pretty cool too.
It's funny that if you look at the letter that we had gotten, I think it was yesterday, from Joshua, talking about our children, right? And I don't literally mean our children, but the young people today being so much more open to that law of attraction concept that the universe is, that we are the creators of our reality, that the universe is always working for us. Even when I talk to my kids who are 18 and 15, they respond to it better than adults.
Yeah. I read that, and I thought about my grandson in that context of that comment about children being far more receptive and older people less so, and also your comment on the podcast the other day, talking about your family and how your children accepted it so well. And I thought about you and them as well. And like, I can't imagine other people I know who are older adopting it as readily as this young guy, my grandson, who was here over the weekend.
That's great. So I had we on these our conversations, we're always, I think, talking about the different manifestation events, or as I like to call them, those emotional triggers, right? That alert us to some sort of limiting belief that we have inside us, and it's our guide, the universe's guidance system for us, right? So a manifestation event, something that triggers a strong emotional belief or fear, usually something negative, and we're to go through that process and try to understand what is that limiting belief. And this weekend, I mean, it seemed like I was all the way up through today. I must be like on some sort of streak. I'm like, and I know you had said last week that you felt like you were in sort of like, wow, one is just piling up on top. And I don't know if the fact that I'm just aware of how much more emotionally connected I am to certain events, when before, I think anger or disappointment or my frustration was so normal that I never gave it a second thought.
Yeah.
And now I do, right? Now I'm like, well,
Yeah.
wait a minute, why am I angry?
Yeah. There's far more emotional sensitivity and far more awareness when you get out of kilter, get out of alignment, when you feel a strong negative emotion, or any negative emotion. It seems far more intense now than it did before, because you increase your emotional sensitivity. And also, if there is a limiting belief that you at one level want to move past, then you will keep receiving manifestation events around that until you work out what is the limiting belief and reduce its intensity. And that's what was happening to me a few weeks ago, as you mentioned, much less so right at the moment. And also, we tend to start to process them on the fly more and more.
So yeah, and that's what I wanted to ask you. So great lead in. So, and I'm I think trying to do that as well. And like, what does that actually mean, right? So anybody that's listening, when you say process them on the fly, because I know I'm starting to go, and I wanted to ask you, what are the, like, you don't go through, and the form that we have, right, which you could actually put up on the bottom of it if you post this, right? It's a great form that Joshua puts out for us, that Gary created. But if we're not going through all, whatever it is, 16 questions in that form, how do you do it in your head? That's what I wanted to ask.
Yeah. I guess the first thing for me is noticing what's going on, that, oh, I'm having a negative emotion and I'm feeling this and it's unpleasant. So the first thing is recognizing that's happening, and then thinking, right, a manifestation event. Aha. Opportunity knocks. Although then you've got to drag yourself out of maybe being caught in the feeling and our old responses that this is to blame, or that person's to blame, or this has happened to me, or whatever. So reframing it is like, oh, okay, I've attracted this manifestation event. I'm feeling pretty out of kilter here, out of alignment. I'm feeling upset. I don't like it. So now I recognize this as a manifestation event which I've attracted for my own benefit, and it's to help me identify a limiting belief. And then I guess I move into thinking, right, what am I feeling about this? And what is the emotion that I'm feeling? And what is the limiting belief behind that feeling? And then recognizing that that limiting belief is an old idea. It's not really how I see myself going forward.
Yeah. So for me, it could take 10 or 15 minutes into the emotional trigger that I'm like, whoa, okay, this is the manifestation event. So the anger or the frustration sort of begins to, and this weekend I had a few amazing ones that it took, I didn't notice right away. It was 5-10 minutes, right? Or 20 minutes into it where I was like, okay, wow. Okay. Why am I feeling this way? This is a manifestation event. So we were at an athletic event over the weekend, and I'm on the sideline doing some coaching, and it's emotional, right? So there are multiple ways. I'm a passionate guy. I like to be involved. But it's a great way to me, it's the greatest gift when it comes to what you and I are going through in terms of trying to understand these limiting beliefs and these emotional triggers. So this is a great way. You're going to, if you lean into coaching kids, you're going to be frustrated, right? You're going to be emotionally triggered, and it's in myself. My daughter was on the field, and I am feeling a certain way. She's playing hard. She's doing everything, and as being the coach, I am. And it took me. I'm like, wait a minute. And I like walk down the sideline, and I'm finally like, wait a minute. Like, what am I doing here? Like, this is such a gift for me. Figure this out, right? Figure it out. It's not her, it's not the field, it's not the players, it's me. And
Yeah.
my first is to accept responsibility. So my first thing, which was really hard for me to go, I created this for myself. I attracted this, right? Because I have a limiting belief that needs to be processed so I can use it as a stepping stone for expansion. To accept that and not blame, as you pointed out, right, your first discussion, that was a big challenge for me. Like writing it out is one thing because you're alone, you're quiet, right?
Yeah.
When you're around other people and you're trying to do this, you go, wait a minute, it's all on me.
Sports events are a good practice for this sort of work, especially if your kids are involved. But I mean, part of the fun is sport. Like I have two favorite sports teams that I follow very closely. There's Manchester United, the English soccer team, football team, and the All Blacks New Zealand rugby team. And I've been following Manchester United since, since I was old enough to even know what it was. And I learned to walk in Manchester. My mother's awesome. From there. My grandfather's disseminated the newspapers. Anyway, so I'll be watching a game, especially one that really matters. And then I'm reminding myself, hold on, it's only a game. And if they lose, it's going to feel really bad. But actually, 10 minutes later, I've forgotten about it. And the next day, the sun comes up and it's like, oh, it actually doesn't matter at all. And then it's like, okay, I really want to still feel the exhilaration and the suspense and, get hugely emotionally involved, but understand what it is and actually focus more on the joy of it rather than take the worry and the pain of loss rather than actually, it's like, oh, damn, back to the pure joy of the whole thing, right? Realizing that it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. And the same with kids' sports, but more so when you're watching your own kids on the field. It's like, hold on, this is all about the joy of sport primarily.
No, it's not youth sports.
no,
you're right.
Theoretically, it's about the joy of sports. yeah. But it is. So, we used to watch like my partner's son playing rugby, and it's impossible not to get caught up in it. When you're watching the game live and there's this family on the field.
So what I finally, and I sort of thought this way, I'm like, oh my God, the universe has created sports, competitive youth sports, to create manifestation events for everybody to begin to process to that next level, because we're all, every parent on the sideline, everybody's losing it, right?
Yeah.
And I was finally like, oh my God, like this is, and I'm like, okay, what is my, I don't have respect. I'm not listened to, right? I'm not good enough. I can't be trusted, right? All of these limiting beliefs. And I'm like, oh my God, I can be, I am. Take a deep breath. This is as much for them as it is for me. right? And it was such a
Yeah.
beautiful moment and then, my daughter wasn't talking to me. I'm not talking to her. I went over and I hugged her and I said, I'm really sorry. That was, and I'm like, that was all me. And I'm like, and I'm sorry. And I'm sorry I caused that. And for me, it was like a 3 or 4 step process. It was first accept responsibility that this event is happening because you invited it into your life, right? People always say, how is this always happening to me? Right? Like, well, because you invited it in.
Yeah. Yeah. And you didn't
More
work it
than
out last
once.
time. Yeah.
So that's step one is like, wow. And then I acknowledge that. And I'm like, okay, what is that true belief? Like, why am I angry? Like, what did I want of that? Well, I wanted that person to listen. Well, what does that mean? Well, I want to be respected. I want to be heard. I wanted to be trusted. I'm like, well, then my limiting belief is I'm not heard. I'm not trusted. I'm not respected. Well, and then prove that false. And I'm like, well, I'm actually on the sideline. There are a bunch of kids and I'm doing this really, really well. And people are responding beautifully and everybody is having fun. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Why am I? And I'm like, I took a moment and I covered it like a blanket. I took and said, this is how it is. And it wasn't. And then I said, why was this for my greatest, for my highest good? And I'm like, you need to understand that you are trusted, you are loved, and that everything is perfect. Right.
And the result of the game is not a reflection of anybody's worth.
No. And it was one of those things too, because at the end of the game, we're up by a goal and I'm like, okay, we have the ball, hold it, it's 60 seconds. And one of the players goes in and just loses it, like doesn't, and then the other team comes down for a shot with like 10 seconds left, and the goalie saved it. And I'm like, pulling my hair, like, what are you doing? But I'm like, okay, wait a minute, like, wait, like, whoa, like who, like, whoa. But it's such and I realized through all weekend of 6 games, I had a lot of events, a lot of manifestation. But at the end, I was like, what a blessing. Like, and even like I came home, and even this morning, I still woke up a little, but as I went through this morning and just continued to process them, I'm like, wow, I'm like, what a blessing. What an absolute blessing.
Yeah.
It's important. And I don't know how to, all this LOA stuff that you and I talk about is only a portion. The manifestation event process, right, that Gary and Joshua have defined so beautifully, to me is the linchpin to getting over that and expanding through what LOA can truly provide to you.
Yeah.
In the biggest way. I would almost want to teach Jessica is brilliant at this. You saw that when I copied you on that manifestation event that I had. She broke it down. You saw her response?
I did.
Right. So I did that. So I did every single one, all 8 that she told me. I'll send them to you because to me, she's brilliant. She's just off the charts good.
Yeah.
And like she could teach, like we should just have, I know we have that workshop every Saturday. We should almost start posting those workshops because that to me is the linchpin to really expanding into what these teachings mean and what their potential is.
Yeah, well, that's true because it enables us to process limiting beliefs, and you can't really expand unless you process your limiting beliefs and reduce their intensity. And the method of doing that, as you say, is with your emotional guidance system that tells you if you're feeling a negative feeling, something you don't want to feel, negative emotion, then you have a limiting belief and start to process it. Is the essence of it. And there was a thing I was reading today. I got a business partner in one of our businesses, and recently we did some work a few weeks ago in the work you and I were doing, where we thought not only about noticing our own emotions, but also becoming more attuned to the emotions that other people are feeling. And I looked at the reaction that this business partner was having in this particular situation, and I thought, he's having a manifestation event. He's kind of put a stake in the ground and he feels he has to argue that point. And deep down, he figures that if we say, well, is this the right way to do it, that he's actually feeling attacked. And essentially that's a worthiness issue. So then normally I would have responded and kind of gone in and argued my corner back to him, which never ends well. And whereas now I think, right, this guy's having a manifestation event. He's struggling with worthiness. He's trying to argue a particular point of view, whereas I'm more interested in just working out what's the best thing for the business. but he's kind of, you know what I'm saying? He's painted himself into a corner in his mind. And I was reading this thing here, which was about a completely different topic. It was just about the idea of going up to somebody you don't know at work and saying hi. And then, of course, well, what if they don't want to talk to me? What if they ignore me? What if they don't like, whatever. And then one of the things that said was, if this person does not acknowledge me, I understand it's about him, not me. It's about his perception of reality and beliefs over which I have no control. And this is the part that really hit me with this business partner. If I feel negative emotion, it is only because I have attachment to an outcome and I give the response meaning. The response is neutral. So this guy is behaving neutrally. It has no meaning unless I give it some. So in the past, I would have got annoyed by it and given it meaning and then become contrary, ornery about it. So I thought that was a very good description of a different kind of event to describe a good way forward so that I feel completely neutral about where this guy is at. And if he gets, when we talk tomorrow, if he gets upset about things, then, I'm not going to, because I understand that I don't need to get upset about it. And I'm not emotionally attached to it. I just want what is best for the business. And if he has a manifestation event, then I will just realize, okay, he's angry, he's having a manifestation event and he's wanting to blame somebody. In this case, it could be me, which is being a victim, right? Yep. Being a victim instead of a creator, but he doesn't know that.
It's, that's beautiful. So it's funny. I'm in Arizona. My parents are in New York, and my mom was, sick. So we were having this conversation, and I was able to have it without an emotional attachment. Like, if I need to fly out there, I'll get on the plane tomorrow. Like there was no emotional, because the road people go down of the what ifs creates so much emotional anxiety that by the time you've gotten down to, 10 minutes into a conversation, people are dying of cancer by the millions every day. Yeah. And you're like, no. So this process has allowed me to, first of all, trust the universe and realize that everything is happening for a reason and that everything is happening the way it should be. And that I can't control or manipulate outside standards. And that if I do, it's going to blow up on me. But what I can do is move in the flow, move in inspired love and inspired action. So what is that inspired love and what is that inspired action? How do you build resources around love? How do you build resources around inspired action versus reactionary resources? I'm going to call this guy and have her moved. Like why? Because I'm afraid that where she is going to, the worst, okay, let's first find out what's wrong. And let's see if we can find the proper attendant for her, the proper care for her. And let's see it's a very different approach versus in the past, I would have gone on like a bull in China shop, right? I would have absolutely gotten my New York mentality. I would have been like, listen here, this is what we're doing. Dude, no one talk. Everybody listen, right? And now it's like, okay, everyone talks. And you're like, okay, that's super interesting. I really respect that. Let's make sure that we include that in the data we're looking for, right? And let's get all the data in. And I call it data now because, to your point, it doesn't have meaning. It's meaningless. It's just data. Yeah. Take it in and then analyze it and tell me what's the outcome you're looking for. Well, I want her to be happy and feel comfortable and feel like she's being cared for. Versus I want her to be healthy, which is an outcome. No. Like, how does she? I want her to feel safe and feel loved. How do I achieve that?
Yeah.
What a different approach than saying, I'm going to move her. I'm going to get the best doctor. We're going to solve this. Like, no. To me, it was such a eye-opening experience. I'm still there. I'm still caring. I'm still putting that same energy in, right? But in a very different way.
Yeah, that's good. That's very good. And you may well get a much better outcome and far less stress for her as well.
I didn't even think of that till you said that.
Well, moving people in those people in care situations is inherently stressful for the person themselves.
Yeah, and I didn't even think of that. That's a great,
Yeah. So if you can find a solution where you are, then that would be a more gentle approach potentially. I don't know the situation. Sometimes scenario. You allow the people in the place where they are to actually bring out their A game for you. and maybe they're not at the
Right.
moment.
See what you just said there. So I grew up in a very small town in New York, and there's one small hospital, right? It's small. I mean, drive. It's the parking lot's only got like 50 spots, right? It's not like it's a big place. And my dad, during the COVID, they're in their 80s, right? So it's a tough time for them. He had fallen ill. He didn't want to go to this particular hospital because he said they don't know what they're doing. And he was, and then he had gotten to the point where he needed to be hospitalized so someone could care for him. And a doctor, and I had said to him, and this was a few months ago, I said to him, Dad, you just need to they don't know what they're doing. I said, Dad, you stop. Like, you just need to let these people run some tests. These tests can be run by anybody, anywhere in the world. No one's taking a scalpel to your head. Meanwhile, this doctor who wasn't supposed to be there was on call for somebody else, shows up and makes this diagnosis that is nobody else on the planet had made over the last 6 months, that he had gone downhill. And in a matter of like 2 weeks, my dad was up and running around and perfectly fine. Wow. And I said to him, like, just let these people do it. Like, you never know. And he was like, I want to be moved. And I'm like, Dad, let the people do what they want. Be nice to them. They're only there doing their job. They don't want to hurt you. And the same thing with my mom now going through this experience. And I said to him, Dad, this is what let these people do their job. Let's collect all the information and let's see how we can do the best job for somebody. Such a different way of making choices than trying to and you really talk about making choices on a limited knowledge. I'm not a doctor, right? And then, but everybody, when someone's sick, doesn't everybody have an opinion?
Yeah.
This is what you need to do. It's like crazy, right? So this to me is like the perfect scenario of this amazing manifestation event that I'm now processing. And I'm like, okay, if I need to fly back to New York, I'm cool. I'll book a flight tomorrow. Mom, I would love to see you. Oh, okay. Well, I don't want to stress. I'm like, let's jump on a plane. I'll see you. I'll come out there. So I'm not rushing out there to solve an issue, to do like, how do we do this out of love, inspired? Yeah, I'd like to see my mom. That would be fun. Not like, oh my God, I got to get there. I got to solve this problem. I got to get on this phone with this. It's a whole different process. Yet the actions are almost the same, but the inspiration for those actions are different, which creates a whole different level for it.
Yeah. Well, when you're open in that way, then solutions appear out of nowhere that you never thought of. Yeah.
But and to your point, which is great, you forget about the stress on the other person, the stress on me, like, it's not there. Yeah. I don't feel it. I'm still going to do whatever I have to do, right? I can call work. I can say I can do this. I can do that. But because my intentions are different, it feels different.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me how important.
Pardon?
I said, it's just crazy how important that is.
Yeah.
Like how valuable that is.
Yeah. So on that point, and the stuff we were looking at today, which I call momentum, and I'll read this. So basically, when you receive inspiration, the first thing that crops up is fear. And then you overcome your fear and you take action, and then you expand and progress to another level. With each action step taken by pushing past your fears, you gain confidence. This will allow you to push past more fear. It will enable you to be in alignment more of the time. Now, so that's the positive momentum, right? So what they're saying is this builds momentum going forward. And the more you push past fear, the more inspiration you'll receive. You will receive more fear, but you are more able to push past the fear and take action and get more of the life you do want and less of the life you don't want. And then they say, if you were to constantly succumb to fear when inspired to action, you would not create more confidence. You would not move toward more love. You would not build positive momentum. Instead, you would allow your limiting beliefs to go stronger. So what they're really saying is that you will build momentum, and it will either be an expanding to the things you do want, expanding in love, or expanding in fear and getting more fear. Because I've often wondered why it is that as people get older, they often end up becoming less and less of the person they used to be, how they shrink, they contract, They become more fearful, their horizons shrink. And I often wonder, what is that? I used to think it was that they were becoming more of who they were deep inside, that the ability to mask it with youthful energy is gone. And if they are a sad or unhappy person, then it's no longer masked. But I realized that this is actually a better explanation, that the more you succumb to fear, the more you kind of go down in that vortex, down in that whirlpool, and the more you actually expand in love or overcome the fear and take the action, the more that snowballs in your favor as well. So I thought that was pretty good explanation, because it also tells you that when you overcome fear and take an action that you're inspired to take, then that has a snowball effect in your favor.
To be honest, like that's brilliant. Like that, connecting that all, like you just connected that all, right? So I'm talking about them as individuals, and you're connecting them all, and then sort of wrapping it up in this momentum and how they do all begin to connect.
Oops.
Yeah, I just said, I was just yelling at my dog because he decided to go up and try to grab my lunch.
My dogs do that kind of thing.
He sees me on the phone and he likes to test me. So he sees I'm on this. He kind of looks over at me and he's just like, "Is he going to say anything?" And now, because I yelled, he's now at my feet, and I'm like, "You're a good boy." He's such a good little dog. We have a golden retriever, and he's got a mohawk. When he was a baby, I guess there was some sort of calic going on, so he's got his natural mohawk.
Wow.
And
yeah,
he's
cool.
just like a loving. He's actually like a little scaredy cat. He's afraid of everything. My wife and I have taken him, it's so funny, like a psychologist, like a dog psychologist. Like, what's like, he's just scared of everybody. He just like cowers behind my wife for everything. But he's a sweet, sweet, sweet dog. But it's funny when it comes to food. Like if I'm having lunch with my wife, he will immediately come sit right by us and wait for that nibble. So thank you for that moment of brevity.
Golden retrievers sound a bit like Labradors in that way. I never had one, but Labradors are famous, wonderful family dogs, but also famous for love of food.
Yeah. He doesn't know when to stop eating. That's the funny part. Right?
Yeah.
Like I actually have to lock up the food. I would have to tell him all the time, stop. Like no more. But I love the way you connected this momentum. And I kind of feel like that. And you connected it last week when you were talking a little bit about what you were going through, right? You're like, it just seems like it's repeating. And then the way Joshua had said, the more you're getting, there's a connection to that expansion. The more you're experiencing these manifestation events, the greater the opportunity for expansion. So you've asked to expand. You've said, I want to grow and I want to get to that next level. And the universe is saying, well, okay, here. And you're going, oh, I can't, no more. Like, I don't want. But and the beautiful thing is that's how you do expand. And that's what we all miss, right? We miss that these emotional triggers, that these emotional events we're all having every day, right? This is how we're supposed to expand.
Yeah. See, that's right. Because it's so tempting to get caught up in those negative feelings and believe somebody has done something to you, and you become the victim rather than recognizing that you created your life in the first place. Another kind of cornerstone concept in this work is the one we talked about quite a lot, trying to understand it better, which is to accept that everything is perfect and there is no wrong in the universe. And once you can start to accept that in the present moment, then applying it to the past is another interesting exploration, that you therefore no longer see yourself as a victim, you no longer have grudges against people, all that kind of thing, and then apply it to the future. And that would really mean the end of worry. But so what happens is you say to someone, well, can you imagine that everything in your life is perfect? And people won't be able to accept that instantly, although my grandson did a pretty good job. He seemed to absorb it quite readily the other day over the weekend. But so you start with the traffic light turns red, right? And it's easy to say, well, I was in a hurry, but actually it's not going to make any difference to anything or anybody. Now I have a moment to calm myself and get back into alignment. You might notice a billboard or the sign writing on the car next to you in the queue or whatever, and think, yeah, I was just thinking about that. Or it might be a concert, hey, so-and-so's in town, I'm going to go. And so whatever it is, you can easily find with a traffic light turning red for a minute or two that you can put a positive spin on that. So then what a lot of people do is they go to what I call the extreme use case. So they pick out something that most people would consider to be really bad in the world, murder, child abuse, whatever it might be, the Holocaust and so on. So they go to the most extreme things they can think of. But so what I always used to say, and I've said to you before, is we'll start with the small things, like when a toddler starts to walk, you're not training them for a marathon yet, right? When they're 18 or 25, they'll be running a marathon, but they're not going to be doing it as a toddler. So don't even think about trying to make them run those miles now. So, and that's not a bad explanation, but I think I really found the missing piece of this jigsaw puzzle yesterday, listening to, it was probably that podcast 309 that you were on actually. And they said, just talk about your own experience and your own reality, right? So you are not here to experience somebody else's reality. And if you see something happening to someone else, it's not for you to necessarily understand how that might be right for them. So in other words, just focus on your reality. It's your universe, it's your creation, it's your world. You created the entire thing. So don't worry about the extreme use cases. Don't worry about, but what about what happened to so-and-so? Just focus on your own reality. And I thought that was, for me anyway, that was the missing piece of the jigsaw as to how to accept that everything present, past, and future is perfect.
I love that, by the way. That is, so here's an extreme case, and I that hit me too. So I have my mother-in-law's boyfriend is a conspiracy theorist, right? And he sends these images and this stuff, and I read them because it's funny to me. So the one they always talk about was 9/11. Now I lived in New York City on 9/11. We had an office on the West Side Highway on 9/11, and the corner office looks out on the Twin Towers. So that morning, driving to work, it was 8:45. I'm on the phone with my wife, who's actually in Atlanta, and we were laughing because we were like, "Oh my God, somebody hit the," and everybody thought it was a Cessna that had just crashed into the very, very top, and there were no real fatalities, right? It was just a horrible issue. And we're like, oh my God, thank God nobody was in there, right? Nobody got hurt. Like nobody knew anything at that point in time. But obviously we learned later how devastating everything was. But I remember all of us going to the window, and it was 8:45 to look at this. And you see it, we see the smoke, and because we could see we're on 36th Street. Right now, the Hudson Yards is all a whole building there, whole built out that wasn't built down there in 2001. Now, the second plane, we see it. I mean, you see it coming down the West Side Highway. I mean, we're watching it.
Wow.
And we watch it go right into the building. I mean,
wow.
Like we're watching it live, and every one of us is like, no way, no way. Like there's just no way. First of all, to see a plane at almost at our eye level, right? At that big. Now, all this guy says is no, here's CIA proof. No buildings ever hit, no planes ever hit the buildings. Right. So this is their, and there's a million plus people that believe this.
Yeah.
Now, in my reality, I watched a plane hit that building. They don't, and and it's fascinating to me. Like, and you can't convince them. I'm like, well, I was there. I'm like, I'm happy to tell you what I saw. I actually have a picture. We didn't have cell phones at that time, like, with cameras. Can you imagine if we had cell phones with cameras at that time? We didn't, right? So one of the guys that we had in our office had one of those click things, and I have one of the images. So but the conversation is, his reality is, no, you were deceived. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I'm not going to argue. It doesn't me any good, right? Did I have friends in the building? Yes. Thank God they got out. I'm blessed and I'm grateful, right? But I know what I saw, right? I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
But there are people, to your point, their reality, they've created a reality, and there's nothing you can do to tell them any differently. How strong your belief system is, right? Has absolutely erased a reality that occurred, rewritten it, right, to something, and it's down to their bones.
Yeah.
And we can do this. We can do the same thing any moment.
Yeah.
I look at that going, I don't look at them as crazy. I really don't. I look at them as like, okay, how do I do that for everything I thought
Right.
was bad?
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
use your words, reframe it. I'm going to reframe everything as if it was absolutely the opposite, right? But you can't convince these people that anything else different.
Yeah. Pointless to try. And I mean, it's their reality. They can believe what they like. And it's
But
quite good to be able to
that's
be
the beauty
interested
of
and
it.
neutral about it, the whole thing. So it makes no difference
That's
to me what that
Oh, it
person
makes no
believes.
difference. And like I said, I was there, and I'm
Yeah.
very emotional. I'm a New Yorker. I love these people, and I will always be in it. But I'm not angry at them. Like I'm like, okay. Like all my friends I have a lot of friends that are cops and firefighters, first responders down there. Are amazing. They were like heroes beyond belief. We have a picture in our hallway of the heroes. I'm not angry at it. I mean, he walks over, he comes over our house, he still doesn't believe. He's like, it was all fake. I'm like, I'm like, it really wasn't. But I, I keep looking at going, he's created his own reality in a way. Like that's how strong our beliefs are. It shows me like when I know I have a limiting belief, I look at what he's and I'm like, that's where I am. I am absolutely believing I am not worthy. But the guy looking at me going, you are. I saw the planes. Like, what do you are worthy, right?
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
going, why do
Yeah.
you think you're not?
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
I equate it to that. And it's like, it's become overwhelming. Like, oh my gosh, this is how powerful that's why we need to process those limiting beliefs
Yeah.
because you can't get past the theory that is conspiracy theory unless you believe something hit the planes. Unless you start believing in yourself again, you can't get past it.
Yeah.
Like you're stuck. Like he's stuck in this thing. Like we have a big thing with two firefighters holding, right? Because like I have friends that were there, and I'm like, and he's just like, yeah, it was all. And I'm like, I just laugh. I'm like, I don't know how you think that. But to me, it was the greatest gift. And so instead of getting angry, right? Because I want to be, because
Yeah.
this was personal to me, I didn't. I was like, oh my God, this is another gift from the universe going.
Yeah. Yeah. To let that person have their opinion and not have any attachment to that and realize it makes no difference whatsoever to you. And you might disagree with it. And instead of thinking, well, if they don't believe that I saw what I saw, like that is no reflection on your worth.
None. But more importantly, it's showing me
The power
that
of
when
belief.
I'm
Yeah.
right, when I'm having these emotional triggers, there's that limiting belief. He has a limiting belief. He believes that this didn't, like that's a limiting. He's giving me an example that's how I am. And I need to process that I'll never get past. I'll never expand past that until I process that limiting belief. He'll never think it was anything else but a conspiracy theory, until he figures out a way to, to process that. And to me, it's like he's stuck in a circle. He's just going like this. And that's how and I'm like, oh my God, that's how I am. But this worthiness, and you see all my manifestation, it's always, I'm not worthy, right? I'm not smart, I'm not worthy. I am in the same exact situation this guy is. He has a different one that he's doing, that he's processing, but I'm in the same exact spot he is. And that's what the gift of the universe was giving me. Look, Jerry, here's the mirror. Literally, here's the mirror image, Jerry.
Yeah. Yeah. So not being judgmental, not judging them, not thinking that their views are inferior, and letting them have their reality. Yeah. And we drove into the city to take my grandson to the airport, into Christchurch City, which is one of the biggest cities in New Zealand. And there's actually a 9/11 monument there because firefighters from the city in Christchurch went to New York. And as a thank you gift, the New York firefighters gave them these iron girders and beams and stuff. And then somebody's turned it into a sculpture, and it's in a park by a busy road in the city, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome. The thing we did before we left New York City is I went down to the 9/11 memorial with our kids the day before we flew to Arizona and moved to Arizona. I'm like, let's go. We're going down. We have a couple of friends' names, and that were firefighters, first responders. We had friends that worked in the building that actually got out. We went over and saw the names, and we left, and it was beautiful. And like I said, it was the way the city responded, and the way the city, it makes me sad where we are right now in America. And you think back to 2001, and it was where everybody was proud to be American, and I'm an American. I'm proud to be an American in every way. But I'm sad to the point we've gotten now where we're starting to tear down, the love that we created for one another back then, and we just loved everybody. We loved each other, and with such big hearts and such openness and such inclusion, right? An inclusion aspect of everybody was included. I don't care shape, color, form, belief, whatever it may have been. You know, if you loved America or were American, you were being loved and you were being shown love.
Yeah.
And it's sad to the point we've gotten now, and you know, but it's eye opening to me. It just shows me that, you know, this is what I have to get over. Like, this is why I'm being given these gifts, to be shown. When I'm emotionally attached to an opinion or an outcome, as you said beginning, which is really great. It's neutral. You said that beautifully. When I define it, right, before it actually comes, before it is anything, and I define it, and then I put an attachment to that definition of it, you're done. Like, you have to process that.
But if let's assume for a moment your reflection on contemporary American society is an accurate description of it, then you could say, well, it does create contrast, and in the way that if you lived in the non-physical, and well, we're in the non-physical, and all you ever know is abundance, for example, you can't really understand abundance because that's all you know. So you come to the physical, you experience some lack, and suddenly it's right, okay, I've had the contrast, I didn't like it, but now I understand the perfection of this abundance because I've had the contrast of the lack. So the creation of contrast is apparently one of the reasons why spiritual entities choose to come into the physical to experience things you can't experience in the non-physical. So I often wondered whether recent past in America was partly about creating contrast to further understand what is so extraordinary and wonderful about that country.
Wow, you know, you just basically summed up the political environment in America. There is so much contrast. I'll use that term loosely.
Yeah.
And you know, we had Trump, who was polarizing. Right now, we have Biden, who's polarizing on opposite sides. And I'm not saying anyone is good or bad, but they're both. There isn't a, like, you know, everybody loved Clinton, right? Everybody loved Obama, and everybody loved Bush. I mean, you know, whatever it was, they were, you know, even though the left or the right, we all found a way to meet, right? But Trump was one way, or it was either, you know, there was no in between. And Biden there's no in between, right? And there's so it's so funny you just said that, but there's such contrast right now in the American political culture. Even the TV stations have divided. Where now we don't get news media, you actually get a political advertisement on either one station or the other station. You're not getting true media. We know that, right? Nobody's telling the truth, but one side is telling the truth that they believe, and the other side is telling the truth they believe, and the truth is nowhere in the middle. The truth can't be found anymore. But the funny part is there's so much contrast, and then I just say that comment where I long for that feeling of 2001, where there was so much love, right? So that contrast was given to me to say, wow. And you just summed it up beautifully. You're right. Like, I hadn't had that thought in, you know, I don't know, 20 years. I haven't had that thought. You just put it in my head by what you just said. So how crazy is that? I guess also
we live in a world where multiple viewpoints are more common. Not everybody finds that comfortable, but there are many more different viewpoints than there ever were before. And that could be another thing that's evolving.
Well said. And it could, and those viewpoints, it's funny because they feed into your concept of contrast, because they are feeding into they're not coming in this way and going that way. They're feeding in from this way, and they're building up either side, right? Versus coming in the middle going, hey, you know, we can go this way or you can go that way, right? And you make the choice or you make the call, which is fine. They're coming either from the left or the right, and they're just reinforcing those messages. So it turns over, and all of a sudden it's like all these, it's crazy, like how we're, even like, you know, my wife or anybody, we you know, she ends up being a little bit more liberal. I end up being a little bit more conservative. Our kids take both of our feedback, and they decide for themselves. We always tell them, decide for yourselves. My wife and I always meet in the middle. We've never argued over one election, over one president, over any, like, we're always like, honey, that's a great idea. Like, you know, no, I feel a little more strongly. Like, we have a marriage 20 plus years. We've never had an issue. I'm like, why can't other people get along? But I never thought about it until you pointed out, maybe all this contrast is there to show us how to appreciate, you know, some of that love and some of that, you know, what we're looking for. Unless there's contrast, sometimes you don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I first traveled to America in about maybe 1983 or something, and I've always loved America. And to me, it's always been the land of possibility and opportunity. I find it more optimistic than most other places, and it is the place where you can be whatever you want to be, to the most extreme, and what people would consider really good or really bad. So you can be incredibly famous, incredibly rich, or you can be incredibly down and out. Whatever, the entire spectrum of life experience is available to you in the extreme in America. And it's interesting to me that it's the home of all major musical trends since the origin of pretty much modern music, you know, going right back to the blues and before that spirituals and so on. So pretty much every significant musical trend has come out of America, contemporary musical trend, blues, jazz, hip hop, rap, you name it, rock and roll, the whole lot. They all came from that common origin, but all of those extraordinary innovations and many of the best exponents of those styles of music were Americans, you know, which is interesting to me. And it's also the home of most of the contemporary spiritual, or whatever you want to call it, thinking and philosophies that I've been interested in since the early 90s. It's pretty much all originated in America. So although, you know, all countries and all people are equally valid and worthy, it seems to me to be the hothouse, the incubator for much of where contemporary or modern, the future of thinking is going. That's one of the, I guess at some level I always felt that about America, and I still believe that.
You know, is that because we're culturally diverse than most countries, in that, you know, we are just a giant melting pot across the board, whatever you want to see. I lived in New York City, I've lived in California, I live in Arizona, I've been to every state in our, I think I've been to 40 out of our 50 states.
I mean, if you take music, for example, pretty much all the music was invented by Black people, right?
Yeah.
Like all the trends are identified. Elvis might have made rock and roll popular to a wide audience. But he did not invent it, right? The rock and roll existed with black musicians before Elvis. And the same with rap. I mean, Eminem even raps about that he's basically like Elvis, that he's taken the black guy's music and, you know, turned it into the white man's popular product. Like, and, you know, that's all true. So, and you might say, well, why is that? And it could be, well, it's the combination of extreme contrast and challenge in some people's lives that kind of brought out that raw creative edge, marry that with a huge market and massive opportunity. And you can see that, you know, that fertile seed that grew out of potentially sometimes great difficulty, you know, has become something extraordinary, like all those musical genres that I just mentioned. So
that's beautiful.
I don't know, that's a wild theory I just made up off the top of my head, but it is more than coincidence that all of that music came from one segment of one country.
It's, you know, and it is a place where if you're passionate and you can, and I do think that if you look at the greatest musicians, and I think you and I discussed this a month back or 2 months back, you know, musicians will tell you, like, you know, how'd you write that song? And they'll go, it just came to me. How many times have you heard that? I've heard a number of, or how did you get that beat? It just came to me. Yeah. Right. So these amazingly talented artists across all the cultural genres, right, across all of them, have a story like that. And that to me says they were in an environment that allowed them to connect spiritually to themselves and allowed them to really a deep connection with their passion, and then gave them an outlet for their passion. And out came this beautiful music. Whatever it may be, it to your point, maybe that's what it is. It's the fact that they're not in a controlled environment that has, you know, 200 years, 1,000 years, 4,000, as if in Europe or in certain areas, right, of the world where there's 4,000 years of storied culture that you can't go against. When America, you know, we're, you know, 1776, it's like for the last 200 years, bam, you do whatever you want. It's like, okay, right? So you could come and redefine yourself. You know, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue to land here. But, you know, we really weren't, and we still, I think, are still defining ourselves. We can't let the politicians define ourselves. And I think what you said was beautiful. as an American, as a God-fearing public service person who loves everybody in America. I don't care what your belief is. I love them on both sides. I love listening to people who are passionate about America because I believe everybody wants the best for America, right? I really do. No matter what those opinion is, I love that. And I think we give, there is no 4,000 years culture. There's no stiff upper lip
Yeah.
like there is in England,
Yeah.
right? We don't, hey, express yourself,
Yeah.
right? It's like, okay, I mean, we have people that have gone so far off and come back and created the most beautiful stuff. And the more the way you say that, I hadn't thought about that as years. You just may have made it up at the top of your head, but for me, it fits with what you're saying. It's a beautiful place for people to connect with their inner self, their inner
Yeah.
soul, right? And
Yeah.
take inspired action.
Yeah.
The more action you take through inspired action, the greater the results, right?
It builds momentum. Yeah, that's for sure. Another curious thing about creativity is that I spend a lot of time in France, and I love France.
Beautiful.
French pop music, I don't like it at all. To me, it's not appealing. It's rubbish. But on the other hand, France has been the place where many artistic trends originated. Italy has too, but I'm just talking about France.
Right.
And also many literary and philosophical trends, existentialism and surrealism and all that incredibly intellectually stimulating stuff in the arts. So I have to think about my theory as to how and why that happened. Part of it's the tradition of intellectualism and art and exploration. And also, strangely, a number of Black American musicians in times past went to Paris because
For inspiration.
well, no, not that. They went there. They might have gone for inspiration, but they were apparently much more accepted there. It was easier to be a Black musician in Paris than it was in America. And
Yes,
they,
I bet.
the racism issues and all of that stuff. So apparently, supposedly, it was a lot easier to be a Black musician. Just talking about musicians, I like a lot. I like pretty much all styles of music, right? I like classical music, opera, jazz, rap, rock, metal, you name it. I like music, right? Pretty much everything. And John Coltrane, the famous saxophonist, he went through he was a very spiritual man, and some of his stuff like Love Supreme, I've always just felt this kind of deep spirituality through that music. And another jazz musician who I felt the same about is actually an English guy, John Mclaughlin, who, when he was younger, played in Miles Davis bands. Anybody that's been through the Miles Davis bands is, and there are a lot of people who, still alive and kicking, they're pretty much geniuses anyway. So he's not an American musician, but he went through this whole Sri Chinmoy spiritual thing, along with Carlos Santana, and they all adopted spiritual names. Like he became Mahavishnu, John McLaughlin, and had a band called the Mahavishnu Orchestra, which is one of the early jazz rock bands, fusion bands. And then Santana called himself something like Devadeep Carlos Santana at the time. And they were all into this thing. And the music of that period, when they were deep into that whole Sri Chinmoy guru thing, I've always found that, even before I knew what it was, it kind of really always, for me, had a deep spiritual element to it. And there's one of his albums in particular, Visions of the Emerald Beyond, and I've been listening to it since it came out, which was probably in the 70s. And even now it's on my stereo made in New York, by the way, my hi-fi, by an esteemed hi-fi manufacturer. It's just, it's transporting, really, which is interesting that those guys were so spiritually inspired, and I feel it very strongly in their music. Anyway, music and creativity, we know that it really is the ability to open to source to allow the creative ideas to arrive, so I assume that if you can connect with your creativity in this way through LOA, if you were an author, you would no longer have writer's block.
If I'm doing a big proposal or a presentation, there's very specific music that I listen to. It absolutely, to your point, it absolutely inspires me and connects with me. I do much better. And you look at the Olympics, right there. They just had the kid from Arizona, the local kid, actually like a few miles out of here. My kids actually practice at the facility that his parents own. If you look at the skateboarding kid, he had earpods in the entire time.
Right.
So to your point, music as an inspirational tool is consistent in almost everything across everything. Music is, and all different. It's amazing because all those different types of music that you just talked about connect with different people, right, in different ways. But it's the music itself that is the inspiration, or sparks that inspiration, or maybe is that magical connection, right, that people need to get to that next level.
Yeah. So that was an interesting exploration, starting with contrast in contemporary America, considering that it's the home of contemporary music, or the music I like anyway, for the last 100 and something years, and also of modern spirituality, starting with, I guess, with what was called New Age back in the day, or even with the Seth books, which were 1970s, I think, with Jane Robertson of the Butts.
Yep, Jane Robertson.
So
I think, yep.
Yeah, and then all of those people like Wayne Dyer, and these spiritual leaders of the time, and many others, and some people would say back to Napoleon Hill.
I'm a big fan of Napoleon Hill as well. I mean, you read those books written in the 1920s, and they're applicable today. Like some of the things that Law of Attraction, he was talking about Law of Attraction back in 1923 when he wrote that.
Yeah. He wasn't able to be explicit about it in the way that the Joshua material is explicit, but I always kind of knew there was a secret in there somewhere, and it kind of frustrated me that I could never quite make it explicit.
Well, so there's a book called, so it's so interesting you say that's called Napoleon Hill, The Devil's Something. The Devil's, it'll come to me. Anyway, that is a channeled book. You like, I had to read it, and they didn't publish it until after he had died. They actually published it in 1970 something, or 80 something. They waited because it's called The Devil's Advocate or something along those lines. And it's Napoleon Hill had a conversation with the devil, and it's a channeled book, and it is the Law of Attraction.
Wow.
It's insane. If you get it, you will love it, because he's like, and they wrote this, they were so afraid to publish this because they thought they were going to be ostracized. Right. But it's right around the time that Jane and the Seth books, maybe within a decade of that. And they finally, but they don't call it a channeled book. It's he has a conversation, but it's him having a conversation with himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
we all have some reluctance to get out there and say, hey, I'm into all this crazy channeling LOA stuff, because we're worried that people think we're frigging crazy.
Yeah. Well, listen, it's 4:10. I have to, my time, and thank you for rearranging. I have to take my daughter out to do some shopping.
Good to see you.
Great to see you, my friend.
In a few days' time, eh? Yeah.
I'm excited for this next phase.
Yeah, indeed. Okay. Good to see you.
Thanks a lot, Rob. Be good.
Adrian.